Trump scores even worse. 39% approve, 61% disapprove. And more than 1 in 5 Americans, 21% surveyed, said that they felt furious with the Trump administration's actions since January.
The numbers are in, and they're not looking good for Donald Trump. A new poll shows that a clear majority of Americans disapprove of his handling of the economy, with inflation and the cost of living topping the list of frustrations.
That frustration is spilling into the streets with mass protests yesterday in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Chicago against Donald Trump's attempted law enforcement takeovers and his expanded immigration crackdowns.
And those frustrations are boiling over. Just this week, protests erupted in Washington, Philadelphia, and Chicago, fueled by anger at Trump's immigration crackdowns and attempts to expand federal law enforcement power.
Friday's jobs report showed employers added just 22,000 jobs in August. The unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3%. Factories and construction firms shed workers, and the revised data showed the economy actually lost 13,000 jobs in June, the first monthly losses since the COVID-19 pandemic.
But protests are just one side of the story. On the economic front, things are sliding fast. Trump promised to end inflation on day one, but instead, his tariffs and trade policies are driving up costs while the jobs market weakens.
Starting on day one, we will end inflation and make America affordable again. When I win, I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one. Starting on day one, we will end inflation and make America affordable again.
It's not just abstract numbers. Families, farmers, and businesses are all feeling the pinch. And while Trump continues to insist he'll fix inflation, the reality on the ground tells a very different story.
You have farmers who can't afford to buy their equipment.
I mean, a Deere tractor costs $225,000.
Exactly right. And so when you start to see those ripple effects, you can understand the economy. The threats to democracy are critical because, yes, Democrats talked about that a lot last year. But I think even though a lot of Americans still want something to be done with respect to immigration and border security, I don't know that they signed up for what they're seeing in the streets right now. And the sort of ripple effect of that, if we're seeing this now, what else can come down the road, I think is something, a message that Democrats have been pushing that is resonating.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say threats to democracy. Republicans and Democrats say different reasons why they feel like there are threats to democracy. But where there's no ambiguity is the economy. 25% of folks say it's their most important issue, Brendan. And when you look at the tariffs and how Trump is handling trade and tariffs, 22% somewhat disapprove, 45% strongly disapprove because they are looking at the way it's already impacting them. How are you thinking and watching this? And when you're talking to folks, what are they telling you? Because you talk to regular folks just like we do, and the folks we're talking to are really concerned and they blame Donald Trump. Brendan.
Well, it's the core promise of Donald Trump's campaign, as you said earlier. I mean, we just had an election that basically came down to the cost of living, and we know what the politics are when cost of living isn't looking good. And so he has had 6 months. I think people were giving him some time to make his case, put his policies in place. And obviously that hasn't turned around. Now I think we're just getting into what's probably going to be the first phase of this, with tariffs starting to actually, have an impact and be felt by people. So we know politics can be really lethal on the economy in general, but when you made this your core promise and your policies are having the direct opposite effect that you said they were going to, yeah, people are going to be pretty upset. And I think that's where the sort of middle falls out for Donald Trump, and he can't sort of be saved just by his base.
Do you think this is an administration, a president who would turn course, right? One of the things that even Democrats say President Biden didn't do enough is talk about the economy early on and what they were doing. It seems like Donald Trump hasn't learned any lessons from him.
Well, I don't think Donald Trump will have any problem saying that things are going well, but people ultimately feel things no matter what you're saying. You can talk up the economy a little bit, but ultimately, I think presidents for decades have learned that there is a limit to how much you can tell people they're doing better when they don't feel that way. So he'll probably try to create his own reality. And I think at some point we have seen that he knows that the tariffs can have bad impacts. He's turned course a few times on them. But at this point, I think some of he has made sort of a long-term bet at this point that this is the policy he's going down. You can't convince him otherwise, and he's just going to have to deal with it and maybe try to change the subject, which he's very good at doing.
And another number that stood out to me in this poll, and I think is maybe counterintuitive to some of the assumptions that I had made of the Democratic electorate so far, which was that while Republicans still prefer an outsider, 6 in 10 Republicans have said that they want a politician who's an outsider. Democrats actually prefer an insider. 3/4 of Democrats say that, even after all of these candidates who have come out on the platform of generational change and being a sort of hard scrabble on the outsider, and that the effectiveness of party leaders in the wake of Democrats' 2024 election loss is what they would prefer, and that independents are also more in line with Democrats. 6 in 10 also want an insider with experience. What is your take on that?
Now, experts are weighing in. Analysts say Trump's core promises are colliding with reality, and the result is a shrinking middle ground. Even some of his supporters, like farmers who once backed his agenda, are now turning against him.
That stood out to me too. And what I interpret it as, we want someone that's not politics as usual, but we still actually need someone to get things done. We actually need someone that is accountable, that is transparent, that understands how the bureaucracy actually works. And the reality is that, with the exception of a few major policy changes in our history, the New Deal, the war on poverty, even the Affordable Care Act, most Americans don't have a tolerance for sweeping policy change in short periods of time. And what we're seeing with the Trump administration is these really dramatic effects, these really dramatic policy changes where people are saying, well, wait, what does that mean? How is that going to affect my life? And he's not actually very good at explaining it outside of bravado. So what I think voters are reacting to is this sense of, take me down a path where you're actually explaining to me and walking me through how my life is going to get better. I don't mind you shaking up the system, but I do at least want to be able to plan for my future. And I think that's what the polling is reacting to.
Yeah, we have brought you on a lot and beat you up about the Democratic Party approval. So, Brendan, I'm going to go to you in this polling. Republicans aren't much better, right? The views and opinions of the Republican Party, 57% unfavorable. Favorable is just 43%. It seems like we focus so much on how unpopular the Democratic Party is, but the Republican Party is right there with them. Do you feel like your party feels the need to fix their own, how the American people view them?
Eugene, we would have taken those numbers any day 10 years ago. We've been in the dumps for a very long time.
These are good numbers for y'all.
Yeah, those are good numbers for us. I'll take that. Look, both parties are unpopular. And we have seen elections where a really unpopular Republican Party sweeps the midterms. Because they're ultimately just more a reflection of the party that's in power. So those matter. It's not that they're not meaningful, but there are more important factors, I think, going into a midterm election. You talked earlier about the threats to democracy being really high, and Eugene, I think you made a good point about how in the last election, a lot of people saw that, a lot of Republicans saw that as an issue too. Today, that being so high tells me that Democrats have a lot of enthusiasm. That's a rallying cry for Democrats right now. And the basic long way of saying the issue that's most important to me at this point is which party has more energy, and I think that's clearly Democrats. Democrats are the ones in the streets. Democrats are the ones protesting. We have had very mixed results or bad results of elections recently when Donald Trump is not on the ballot. Midterms are just about which party can turn out their voters or base voters, and ours don't seem to come out very much when Donald Trump isn't on the ballot. So I think that's probably more important than whether people think the party is popular or not.
Yeah, the special elections over and over, Democrats have been overperforming over the last few months.
There are really so many fascinating questions that were asked in this poll, specifically in the Gen Z section of this. Young men who voted for Trump ranked having children as the #1 definition of success, versus young women who voted for Harris ranked it as last in a list of items. But I want to ask actually both of you just about some numbers that amongst the Gen Z cohort that haven't seemed to move, which is 45% of young men approve of Trump's handling of deportations and immigration. There was obviously a lot of conversation about the Trump bro and young white men gravitating towards Trump this election. I mean, what do these Gen Z numbers tell you about where that cohort stands right now?
Well, I think I think you can't take that or separate that from attacks on higher ed and some of the other things that we're seeing with respect to DEI and so on, because a lot of it is projection of blame. You know, who is to blame for your economic status, your inability to be the masculine self that you should be as a man. We've heard a lot of that language. I see a lot of that language. Oddly enough, it comes into my feed a lot, this whole question of masculinity. So I think listen, I disagree with it, but that has resonated across several elections, and I think that's what it may be reflected in that polling there. But it's something that Democrats really do need to pay attention to, because they're losing a lot of men, a lot of older Democrats, particularly of color, who are voting more Republican, and how it's affecting the economy. It's a serious question.
Brendan, last word on the Gen Z of it all, because we are seeing Gen Z men of all races being a little bit more Republican. This is also something you probably would have taken when you were much more active on the Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of go back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, that's a demographic that Republicans would never have been able to count on before, and Donald Trump brought them in. Whether or not, I mean, those are what we would call low propensity voters, particularly for Republicans. And so expecting that they're going to come out in a midterm when Donald Trump isn't on the ballot, that's a tough proposition for Republicans. And it's also not surprising if they end up sort of softening on their support, because they weren't terribly bought into this in the first place. It was sort of a moment. So the Republicans have a lot of work if they want to keep those people in the boat, on the team, and showing up.
Yeah, I've been calling them borrowed voters over the few months. Basil Smackel, Brendan Buck, thank you both for coming on.
The bottom line, Trump promised relief, but Americans are getting higher prices, fewer jobs, and rising unrest. And the more this continues, the harder it will be for him to sell the story that everything is going just fine.